Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew Whedon. I'm on the board of the Indo-American Arts Council. Thank you so much, all of you all, for coming here. It's my great honor and privilege to introduce you all to this very esteemed panel. To my extreme left, to your right, we've got Shobha, Tharoor, Srinivasan, who's written this amazing book about the life of her mother called Good Innings, Lily Tharoor, and an absolutely fascinating journey. It actually brought back a lot of memories of my own grandparents and grandfather as well, having studied in the UK, coming back to India, and a little bit about Kerala, growing up in a village, and then just being exposed to the entire world and how that influenced the kids. A little bit of a trivia question. If anyone remembers the famous Amul ads in India, there's a very iconic picture of a baby, and that baby, take a guess, who could that be? No, not too many points. We also have Vandana Saxena Poria, who's written this amazing biography on Alec Padamse and highlights his Alecisms, which is very fascinating. I mean, he was, of course, the god of marketing and theater, and growing up in India, it was someone we clearly looked up to in very high regard. Do have a bit of a confession to make. As teenagers growing up in Bombay, we did have a crush on his wife, Sharon Prabhakar. And I must say, I
have a crush on you.
There you go. We've got a fan club right there. And then Vandana is also a chartered accountant, and got into the creative side, which is always fascinating. Being a recovering chartered accountant myself, so that's always fascinating. And then right here we've got Ritesh Batra, who's a filmmaker who's won many awards at Cannes, the BAFTA, you name it. So it's my great honor and pleasure to welcome you all. Over to you, Ritesh.
Not a chartered accountant. Unfortunately, I couldn't clear those exams. Such a pleasure to be here to introduce these wonderful people and the amazing books that I had a chance to read. There's a couple of people we need to invite to stage before to do a little ceremony to introduce these books to the world. Can we have Mr. Rakesh Kaul, Preeti, Urs, and Suman stage?
And
Anil.
Yeah. Great.
Hi.
Sorry. Let's just give everyone a book. If we can get you to open. Shobha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Ritesh, you as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The idea is we'd all like to.
Oh, and we pull on this ribbon, and then this
Yes, and
book
then it's
flies
launched
out
in
to the
the
world
US.
like a bird.
Okay. 3, 2, 1.
It's gonna fly.
There we go.
Thank you. Oh, congrats.
Thank you.
And the ribbons go to my daughter.
Oh, yes. We will keep all the ribbons for you, Aisha. Thank you.
Thanks, Vandana.
Thank you.
And congratulations on the New York launch.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. My name is Ritesh Batra, and I have the wonderful pleasure of talking to these wonderful ladies about their books. Before we get into specificities, I write and direct for a living, so whatever I write, nobody gets to read. Because it ends up as a movie, so nobody finds out how good or bad it was what I wrote. I get to hide behind the movie. But you guys are going to put this out to the world, and people are actually going to write the words you wrote. So can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? What do you do? How do you go about writing this book? wake up in the morning, go for a run, ride for 5 hours a day. What kind of rider are you?
Who are you starting with?
Who do you want to start with?
Oh, why don't we start with you? You were the Amul baby.
That's true. That
We have to
dates
start
me,
with you.
doesn't it? Well, one of the things that wasn't mentioned in the biography is that I'm actually a children's author. I've published 10 children's books, both poetry, prose, hybrid genres, all kinds of things. And this is in some ways my first offering to the adult world. I mean, I've written essays and other things, but in terms of a published book, this is new. So as far as the process of this book was concerned, it is a self-authored. It is it's one author, and that's me. It's not a book written by my mother. My mother is still alive. So the process of this book was a little different. I needed to frame it in a different way. From a sort of feminist critical, literary critical perspective, this is evidently a book where we are there's actually a term for it. It's called speaking nearby. And what that really means is that there is enough of the intimacy of connection with the person that I'm speaking about, and yet I'm not ventriloquizing her voice. It's my voice, but it's my voice as though it were her. And I write both in first person and in third person with this book. And so we start out with my mother's reflections, and at some point when we read, you'll get a sense of that. And then the rest of the book is in the third person narrator. My process, is essentially a lot of thinking. I don't know if you do that, a lot of walking and going for walks, as you said, thinking about what it is that you want to write about and how do you want to frame the book. So that's essentially my process, is figuring out how I want to frame something. And then once that's done, this is, after all, a book that was a lifetime in the making, because it's related entirely to my memories and my recollections, my conversations, my connections, and all of that. So in some ways, this book is a bit of an outlier, because obviously it's a biography. But my normal process is not get up in the morning and sit down with a cup of coffee for 4 hours a day or any of that. As women who hold up half the sky, we've got 100 other jobs we're doing. And, the book is always percolating, but the sitting down and writing is essentially whenever you can. But this book took only a few months to write, believe it or not. And then, of course, I checked on dates and timelines a little bit, and some specific details of names, etc., with siblings and my mother. But the rest of it is essentially my recollections.
Okay, and you think the family is going to be pleased with everything?
Well, this book
there?
released a year ago.
Yeah.
So unlike Vandana's joy of unveiling the book today, this is a book that's been doing the rounds. It was at the Bradford Literary Festival. It was in San Francisco. It's been in India at festivals. So my mother did say, when she saw the draft, "Why are you writing about me? What have I done? I haven't invented anything." So has it been received well? People ask, is she proud of you? And I say, the first thing she asked me is, you forgot to mention that I used to read to the blind in Calcutta. So my mother's a hurricane. You'll know when you read the book.
When you write a memoir about your family, it's an act of impressing those you don't know, but pissing off those you love. But what about you? What is your writing process like for this book?
So it was quite crazy, because Alec, I think this was about 3 years before he passed away. Now, Alec is, as many of you will know, he was India's biggest advertising guru and also theatre director and actor. He sat me down one day and he basically said, "Vandana, I am going to write a book and I would like you to write it with me." And I was like, "Okay, what's it about?" And he said, "I don't know yet." And I was like, "Okay." And he said, "But I'm restless. I know I have a book in me. You just need to write it with me." So basically, I then said to him, "Okay, how about I come round and we have conversations, and I record those conversations, and then we'll see what kind of comes out." And so we did. And we basically met 50 to 60 times. We had 175 hours of conversation. And what you have to understand, Ritesh, is that both he and I are ADHD. So one normal hour was like 5 hours for most other people. We tackled like so many subjects. So then what I had to do was get everything transcribed, and I would listen to stuff, and I had this big whiteboard, huge whiteboard, and I would start writing down words that came to my mind. And then basically, this is where my chartered accountancy, I think, really helped me. Started to categorize the conversations and then kind of look for common themes. And then Alec and I decided that the book was really about hijacking people's minds, getting people to think differently. So we worked out what we wanted in each of the chapters, and then he passed away. And I was devastated. Ryle, his daughter, and Quasar and everyone was obviously devastated. So then Ryle was like, you have to finish the book. Daddy was so excited about the book. And I was like, I can't finish it without him. And she said, you have to, you don't have a choice. And I would sit there at my desk every day, and I would literally channel Alec. I would just go, Alec, these are your words, how do we write this? And then all of a sudden things would just come to me. And it was his voice that was in my head, and I just kept writing. And then Ryle read it, and she was like...
So he was a ghostwriter.
He was the ghost. He really was the ghostwriter, yeah.
But you both pretty much answered my first question about how it kind of came about. But both these books are so different. One was a memoir about your mother, one is about the legendary Alec Padamsee that we all grew up with. I actually, for the record, did not have a crush on his wife. I just, I actually was a big admirer of his, though.
Sorry.
Oh, that's which one, she said. But in a way, both books are also similar because they are about ordinary people who went on to do extraordinary things. So you talked a little bit about your subjects pretty much picked themselves. One of them came to you, one of them birthed you. But what is it about these people you think, having spent your life with them and so much time with them, 175 hours of recording, and then also working after with the ghost, so you know them so well. What is it about them made them who they are? What is it about them that made them extraordinary?
I grew up... My mother was an extraordinary figure, and she still is. She's around, and she has inspired so many generations, including, my own children. She's visited America often and done things. It's all in the book. But what was interesting to me is this was written during the pandemic. It was a time we were all sort of living fairly solitary lives in our own homes. And storytelling is such a wonderful way to make a connection. And my mother's story is really not unique to her. It is a story that when this book is read and when I discuss it outside, resonates with so many people of her generation as well as of younger people, just like Matthew, who introduced us, who said it reminded him of his grandmother. There are many women who sort of play, I guess, second fiddle in some ways to extraordinary men whose lives are documented, whose biographies are written. Especially in India, my father was a larger-than-life man who died, unfortunately, at a very young age. He was only 63 when he passed away. And, my mother, that's the other question she asked is, why didn't you write about your dad? But, there's enough being said about him, and people who've honored him, who've cherished him, who've loved him. I thought it was important for me to sort of talk about how a village-born woman who learned to speak English in London, who'd never crossed the street on her own or done anything on her own, got married to a wonderful man who indulged her in London, but she still realized that even though she'd learned English in school, she didn't really know how to speak it. She used to listen every day to Desert Island Discs. I don't know how many of you have heard Desert Island Discs, but I've now become a big fan of Desert Island Discs, and it's just a wonderful, it's essentially where the host picks a celebrity artist to choose 8 discs that resonate with them, and then they talk about why the music appeals to them, and you learn a little bit about the artist as well as the music. And my mother would listen to it and sort of mimic those, I can't remember, unfortunately, the announcement, but something like, welcome, we're here, and this is what's going to happen, etc. But she learned her English listening to Desert Island Discs every day, and even today, because she learned English that way, she can tell you the whole signature tune and all of that. So here is this incredible woman who was every step of the way did these unusual things, and then marched us, moved to Bombay when she was little, learned to drive when my father has his first heart attack because she recognized that, she really shouldn't be dependent on just someone else. Did some extraordinary things. I can give you a funny story. Growing up in Calcutta, when we first moved to the city, we were all children. My mother met, because my father was in the advertising world.
Yeah, that's
we have
right.
a lot of synergy between our books.
Huge.
I grew up as a teenager going to Ali Kadamsi's plays, because his English plays were the best in India. Truly, they were.
Me too, actually.
I don't know, he's just amazing.
Yeah.
And my brother and his son, one of his sons, Ranjit, were in school together in Campion School.
In fact, Malini's here.
Oh,
There she is.
oh, hi! I've met you. Years ago. That's the last time I met Ranjit, unfortunately. And Ranjit had the first milk moustache. You remember the ad campaign, Milk Moustache? Sorry, just joking. There's so many stories, but I think I've digressed from your question, though. As to
No. I think you just gave me more fodder for my next question. And what about Alec? Of course, we know his, sort of his work is just so public, but in your estimation, and as far as you knew him, what made him different from all the, of course, the success is self-evident, but what made him different from all the other, admin and theatre people at the time?
Yeah, no, great question. I think Alex, similar to your mother, he went to the UK when he was very young. He went and studied at RADA. And I think the 50s and 60s were such a different era outside of India that he was exposed to a lot there. And when he came back to India, it was just like, how do I make things better? How do I change things? And he had this relentless curiosity and this relentless desire to make things better for other people. That was very important to him. And his whole family were about that. The Alkazis and the Padamsis, they set up theatre, or they were great proponents of theatre, and they were trying to show through their theatre productions, different ways of living, different perspectives, etc., etc. And I think him having grown up on that, as well as his own experiences abroad, when he came into advertising, he came up with these fantastic ideas. And I think that was it. It was that he was exposed to different practices and perspectives at quite an early age.
Yeah, it was also such a different society back then. Like in India, it wasn't the India of today or the India of the 2000s. It was a kind of a Soviet economy, but all these campaigns are so iconic. They're imprinted in everybody's head. They didn't have as many distractions, but also people didn't have. Everything was a new thing. Everything felt like so fresh. Everything that he did.
Yes, and I think one of the main reasons was that Alec really listened to people, and I felt that when I was reading your book as well about Lily. She learnt from other people. She was relentlessly curious, and she was willing to try different things. Alec, for example, some of you, those of you from India, will maybe remember the Liril advert of the woman in the waterfall. Mm-hmm. I see a lot of women.
It has a lot of iterations too, with different actresses too.
But it's worth knowing why. So basically, back in the 70s and 80s, soap was all about hygiene. Right. And Alec wanted to change that. And so what he did was he was in the villages, and he was talking to women in the villages, and he said to these women, when do you feel most free? And you've got to remember, this is in the villages where patriarchy is rife. The women actually came to him and said, when we're in the bathroom having a shower, that's when we feel the most free. And that immediately spun this image for him of, let me create a soap with freshness, and let me have a woman in a waterfall, because that represents the freedom of the women. So that's what he did, and he was the first person to bring in that soaps are fresh, as opposed to soaps are hygienic. And Karen Lunel was the original water nymph or water sprite in the water.
She was discovered for Liril, right.
Yeah.
I remember, this is from maybe when Preeti Zinta was also To the
Did
Little
she?
Class.
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
I
I
don't
think,
remember
yeah.
that.
In the
But
early 2000s.
just to get back to this whole thinking outside the box,
Yeah.
there was a section, and I read the book, I have read it quickly. There was a section about him talking about fashions. Why does
Oh, yes.
everybody
Your
have to
mum.
do? And it was so curious because my
Yes.
mother is probably about 8 or 9 years younger than Alec. So Alec was 3 years older than Dad. I mean, but it's all a similar generation. But my mother moved back from England to London, to Bombay, and they happened to be members of a club. And she went in, decided she wasn't going to dress like everyone else. She wore trousers and a sari choli as an outfit and
Yeah.
went into the club. And, she's probably slender enough in those days and it looked good and all of that. But a lot of, the high society people sort of looked at her and said, oh, hello, Lily, starting a new fashion. And then curiously, a little bit later, she noticed that there were some other women wearing those kind of outfits.
Yes.
So, the idea of creating your own fashion, that's
Absolutely.
Alec's line. But in a sense, Lily did that too at that time.
Yeah.
And, she grew up in a tiny little village where her entertainment was sort of watching cows and goats go for a walk to the river.
This is
So
also...
that's that spirit, that's
Yeah.
what we're talking about. It's the
This is also-
curiosity, the wanting
yeah.
to learn, the wanting to change.
It's also a country where like the education system was designed to create like an administrative class for the British, right? For clerks,
Yes,
essentially.
yes.
Conveyor belt.
Yeah, and it's still like that. So people who
Yeah.
did not follow that mold, like your mother and Alec, really stood out. Can you tell us a little bit about, like, you mentioned it already in your answers, but what parts of the book were actually hard to write, difficult to write for you guys? Like, what sections were like just hard to tackle as writers?
I
Because
think
when I pick up a book, like sometimes I've had the privilege of talking to a writer like now,
Yeah.
and I'm always very curious about that. I pay particular attention to that. I found that that is actually the most, somehow ends up being the most rewarding part of the book for me to read. Whatever was hard for you
It's a
to
great
write.
question. Yeah, you want to go?
Yeah, I was just going to say, that one of the main reasons why Alec wanted to write this book, and it goes into the hardest part, is fundamentally when he looked around, he couldn't see people who were happy. He just saw lots of people who were going on to get the next promotion, get the bigger car, get the bigger house, and they weren't concentrating on what made them happy. And one of the most powerful chapters, but most difficult to write in some ways, was a chapter called Speaking the Unspoken Dialogues, where he encouraged people at his plays, after the play, he encouraged people to sit down and talk about incidences that they don't talk about. And I think for me, it was quite hard writing that particular section, because it was getting people to open up and speak their unspoken dialogues. And there are some pretty hardcore unspoken dialogues in the book. So I think that was probably the hardest for me. So for example, there is this particular part where he's talking to a guy who works at a morgue, and this guy talks about how he has feelings for some of the people who have passed away in the morgue. That's an unspoken dialogue. But there's also many others about, especially about women who have had sexual abuse happen to them, and the things that they have to keep suppressed, or they had to keep suppressed in the 80s and the 90s, because of course they were told it was their fault. So.
Well, for me, and my mother, as I told you, is still alive, and she was going to read the book and critique it or respond to it or love it. And so I wanted to be a little bit mindful. This is not a conventional biography, just so that everyone knows. It does follow the timeline of birth in the village all the way up to now, where she's forwarding WhatsApp messages to us and still telling us what to do. But it does follow the timeline, and it does have what I would call the crucial parts of her life, because those were the chapters that in some ways are the teachable moments. This book has been written sort of as a self-help memoir. I mean, I think that's how Penguin published it. They put it under the genre of self-help as well. But then, as Mohsin Hamid said, I think every book is sort of self-help.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, what was the most difficult part for me to write? I mean, I think, the dissolution of my brothers and sisters' marriages really affected my mother. And, as an adult, Mum had all of us early, we were young friends. We were, even though I'm her daughter, I was very much a mother myself at that time and a wife and all of that. So I knew the sort of movement she was going through. And my father was gone by then. And so the pain of having to deal with divorce, even though she was modern, I think she just kept feeling like somehow it just wasn't right. Somehow, they've worked at it harder or whatever it is. So that was hard for her, and I had to describe it a little bit. I mean, I initially thought, is it a chapter that I need to? But, she learned to come to terms with it. The same thing was my brother joining the political force in India, and it's, we grew up at a time where politics was an ugly word, in the sense people would say, and Sohail Saith here this morning had his own colorful descriptions about politicians. So, they don't, the idealistic notion of the fact that a politician is someone who really comes, brother gave up a hugely lucrative and lovely life to return to India, where he spends money out of his own pocket to try to make a difference in the world. But the reality is you're still thought of as someone who's probably got your hand in glove with bad guys, or that kind of thinking. So I think she found that very hard as well. So those were the sections that I found very hard to write about, because I knew that it would be something that she was going to be reminded of again. So it's particular painful moments in her life were the ones that were hard for me to write about. But you can't really excuse that or remove that from a woman's life, because it does inform you. And as you said yourself, it's those sections that move you the most when you read a book, Ritesh. And very often it's those aspects of our life that sort of make us stronger.
Yeah. I mean, I have some thoughts on divorce myself, but I won't digress into that. It's hard for kids. I always think like that because, haven't been through one and having a kid, but I mean, you don't often think about how hard it is for parents. But moving on to cheerier topics, who are your, so when you finish writing, like when you have the first draft, aside from your editor, like who's your first reader? Who's your first audience for this?
Oh my goodness.
For each of your books?
I had a very tough time because obviously Alec was really well known. So the kinds of people who were the first readers were people like Ronnie Screwvala, who brought Disney to India, his billionaire. He was like, Vandana, I want to read it. And I was like, okay. So I had people like him, obviously Ryle and the whole family, who all pour over Shakespeare and, tear Shakespeare apart. And I was like, oh my goodness, what are they going to do with this? But actually it made me stronger, I think. So I had Ronnie, I had Kabir Bedi, Sabrina Merchant, Sabira Merchant.
Connections.
Yeah. So Pearl and Alec's connections. So they read it. And then I also gave it to, because there are some very controversial bits in the book as well. And so I gave it to 4 of my toughest friends. And I said, I want you to interview me and ask me the most difficult questions. And so that was a really good experience. And they helped me just edit bits to make it a bit smoother. I think that was really helpful.
And who's your first audience?
Well, my first audience was my mother and my siblings, really. The book has actually traveled a lot. I mean, it's hard for me to sort of have a book out there that's not looked at because I happen to have a celebrity brother. And so there were a lot of people picking up the book and asking lots of questions and wanting a lot of attention that way. But my mother, it was really, this book was a tribute to my mother, and as I said, to other women of her generation and of generations before her and after her, who I really believe hold up half the sky and really need their due. And I'm hoping that the book resonates with other women and other men as well, who have other women in their lives. So that was the purpose. That was my first readers were family, and beyond that, it was just anybody else who read it. So it's not that we have the publishers, editors look through things,
Sure.
but they gave me free rein to write what I wanted. So as I said, it was that kind of a book.
Also girls have such a special, different relationship with mothers. Like I'll never know my mom the way my sister does. Is there something in the book, like when your brother read the book, was there something in there that was just news to him, something he didn't know?
Well, the title of the book, the book is called Good Innings, The Extraordinary Ordinary Life of Lily Tharoor. And when I sent him the cover picture, it had the title on it. My brother said, Good Innings? Why have you named it Good Innings?
That's
She
exactly
doesn't
how
know
he
any-
sounds, actually.
Huh?
Yeah, I'm just kidding. I was
Sounds
that's exactly
like him.
how
They
he
said,
sounds.
why have you named it Good Innings? Mommy doesn't know anything about cricket and she doesn't even like cricket. And I said, well, you clearly don't know her as well as I do. Because if you ever ask my mother, and you can do that, well, she's getting older now though, but most of the time if you say, hey Lily, how are you doing? And she says, what's up these days or something, she'll say, I've had good innings. And I was talking to another author friend at lunch, and she said, yeah, she has relatives of that generation who do that sort of thing. They've got these very, it's top of the hour, those kind of English terms that were used at that time, they sort of parrot that. So it's not that mum didn't enjoy cricket. I mean, she didn't really, but she wasn't crazy about it the way my brother was. But it is true that she knew what a good innings was, and India's going to have an opportunity to show us again tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know that, right?
Yeah.
We
No,
made it to the
actually,
finals of the
no,
World Cup.
I don't follow
which is
cricket
huge.
anymore.
Okay.
But what's happening tomorrow?
Well,
You
they
the
won their
only-
semi-finals.
You must be the only Indian in the world.
Yeah.
That's huge. It's huge. So anyway, so what did he say?
I don't follow sports. I'm really.
It's the World Cup final.
It's a World Cup final.
Yeah.
But isn't there so many World Cups now? The T20 one day.
This is the
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the cricket equivalent of football.
Okay.
It's a big one. It's a big one. And that's what I discovered.
In my defense, I don't follow football either. Equal opportunity offender. But
So that was one, and then it is true, I know you're sort of getting at to, my brother wrote a prologue to this book only because I had the joy of writing this book, and there were many other people in the family perhaps who would have wanted to write one. And so I told my brother, because he's the eldest born and he does feature in the book, that he could write the prologue and have that benefit. And I gave my daughter, who happens to be the only granddaughter that my mother has, because everybody's had boys, and her favorite, because she's a girl, I guess, and because she took I say it's not because she's a girl, it's because she took the time to listen and be and participate in ways that the boys didn't. But anyway,
Boys
so my
just
daughter
don't.
wrote the epilogue and my brother wrote the prologue. And in his prologue, which is a very beautiful and very moving prologue, he talks about the fact that he could never do enough for my mom and how he never really had a good relationship with her. And it's only as she became older that he began to appreciate her in the way that the girls did. So there you are, your answer.
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually a better answer than I anticipated. The biggest pleasure of talking to writers and a moment like this is you guys reading from your book. So I have more questions, but I don't want to deprive the audience
Thank
of
you for reading
of you
this.
guys.
It
No, it's
means
my
a lot
pleasure.
when-
It was my total pleasure. Would you guys just like to read a section from your book
Love to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
for us? Why don't you go first?
Okay, so get the glasses. Okay, so the book is called Let Me Hijack Your Mind, and the idea is that Alec really believes that we've outsourced our thinking. Forget outsourcing services, but we've outsourced our thinking to people, to society, to religion, to etc., etc. And the idea is to hijack ourselves back. And he gives an example, which I think is a really great one. He says, so it's in a chapter which is called, well, I won't tell you the name of the chapter because you'll understand. He says, for years we have lived with hypocrisy and double standards. Here is a classic. I was at a club in Calcutta a few years back, giving a talk to a group of ladies there. They were the well-to-do of the city, decked up in their finest makeup and drenched in jewelry. I started with something that they were least expecting. I asked, How many of you believe it's okay to have sex with a stranger? They all looked at each other shocked. A few even gasped and shook their heads in outrage. One lady raised her hand and said, "Sir, how can you say that? You're disgracing all of Indian womanhood. How can you say that? Sex with a stranger." She turned her nose up and continued, only those American women, you know, those people, the ones who end up divorced and all that. No reflection. Anyway, later in the talk, I asked, how many of you ladies believe in arranged marriages? There was pin-drop silence as the penny dropped. As they shifted about uncomfortably, I said to them, this is what you actually say to your kids. Don't sleep with anyone before marriage, but marry who I tell you, even if he's a stranger to you. Astonishing. As you can imagine, these ladies did not take it sitting down. There was uproar. They argued vociferously that it was different and that I was taking the situation out of context. I, on the other hand, was astounded that the entire audience could not accept the fact that their daughters were sleeping with men they'd hardly met on their wedding night. You might be surprised to know, or not surprised to know, that I was politely asked never to come back.
Oh, that's a delightful section.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I wanted you to hear a little bit of my mother's voice. So I'm going to read something that's not quite so delightful, but is moving to me. Because in many ways, probably one of the most important aspects, so if you asked my mother what was her signature achievement, she would probably say building her own home. And, you know, just like V.S. Naipaul's House for Mr. Bishwas, where the person, something Tulasi, I think her name was, spends the entire journey of the book sort of trying to get a roof over one's head. It's the notion that when you're widowed, somehow in India, usually, I remember Mummy saying once to me that women in India of my generation, when you've lost your husband, you either need to have your son with you or you need to have your husband. You know, there was that sort of patriarchal thinking that a woman, a widow of her age, can you hear me? Have I done something?
Yeah,
okay. That a woman of her age is actually of no use in some ways. And my mother's, many of her achievements that I talk about in this book are all after my father passed away. So this is the section that's in her voice. The achievement I am most proud of was building my lily cottage in Kovepudur, a beautiful suburb in the outskirts of the city and closer to Palakkad and my mother. I had always wanted an independent house and described my ideas to the architect for him to draw on paper. Then I contacted a builder. The upper floor of the house had a separate entrance, so I could rent that portion and earn a monthly income. I thought it was an ingenious plan. The ground floor had a large room where I could gather my friends and devotees for bhajans. This was something I always wanted to do. With God's grace, I managed it all on my own. My children had wanted me to buy a flat, which would be safer and easier to maintain. But I needed to build this house with the front courtyard for the tulasi to grow and grace the house. This was a dream that I had for a long time, and I was able to fulfill it. I really enjoyed and appreciated my mother's frequent visits when she stayed with me in my lily cottage. We were both strong, opinionated women. Though she didn't say it directly to me, I knew that she was impressed by what I had built on my own. I lived in the house with only part-time help and drove the 90-minute distance on my own to Mundarath. Mundarath is her ancestral home where her mother lives, to spend a few days with my mother every month. My 3 children made the effort to come from abroad every year with their children and stayed with me in this house as well. But I had only lived a few years in my lily cottage when the house was robbed while I was away on a meditation retreat. I feel the watchman must have partnered with the thief to have planned this robbery so cleverly. Anyway, after that robbery, I did not have the courage to live in the house alone. Our past experience as landlords made me wary of renting the house to a tenant. I asked a friend to find me a buyer right away. Shashi thinks I made a point to build the place because I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. He said that once I had done the job to my satisfaction, I sold the house. Perhaps he is right.
So sweet. So sweet. I believe they need to show video, right?
Just, it's not really a video, but basically Alec was, let's say, a bit scathing about religion. And we all know about the Ten Commandments, and Alec was really of the view that we should each come up with our own version of the Ten Commandments. So if you wouldn't mind, I will just, it's like a 30-second video. Let's.
This is a video about the Ten Commandments?
It's his version
It is the
of
Ten Commandments.
It is his Ten Commandments.
From
Yeah.
Ali
From
Fadamsi.
Alec Fadamsi.
Thou shalt treat all human beings as equal. Thou shalt speak out when thou seest injustice. Thou shalt help thy neighbor in need. Thou shalt shun dishonesty. Thou shalt respect thy neighbor's religion. Thou shalt build bridges, not barriers. Thou shalt not practice double standards. Thou shalt always respect women. Thou shalt not blame the many for the sins of the few. Thou shalt always listen to the voice of thy conscience.
For next year's video, they're going to hire a filmmaker. Not a graphic, effects person. But I just wanted to open up for some questions here about these wonderful books. Go ahead, please.
I asked Shobha if she saw herself in her mother's biography. Did she have insights? Did you have insights about yourself? Because you have a lot of parallels, so I was wondering if you had an insight.
The interesting thing is, maybe one of the other reasons I wrote this book is that my mother was sort of indefatigable and furiously ambitious and exceptionally driven for a woman of her generation. She was not happy with the status quo, and that's what reminds me of Alik. But when people got frustrated with her, or got frustrated with me, they would very often say, "Gosh, you're just like your mother." And I've heard that usually in a pejorative way. And I thought it was so important to sort of wrest back who she is. Not because I think, I do have many of my mother's qualities. I mean, I don't want to divorce myself from that. However, did I think back on ways, I think I understood her the best of the three of us. My father was really the favorite in the house. Mum was only my favorite. So I think I earned the right to write it for that reason. So did I see parallels? No, but I think I understood her. I understood the insecurities she felt, growing up. I mean, with my father, who had his first heart attack when he was 37. My mother, she was in the public eye. They lived a very particular kind of life, but feeling insecure that if he wasn't there, that she would just be back in the village. It caused her to have an energy that maybe others couldn't understand. But somehow it clicked, the female connection. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Okay.
Vandana, please tell us Alec's philosophy about marriage, please.
So, Alec's philosophy on marriage, right? You go to school every year, and at the end of every year, you have to take an exam to get to the next level. Driving licenses have to be renewed. Hopefully you can see where this is heading. Why is the one biggest commitment that two people of their own volition go into is till death do us part? So Alec's philosophy is very much we should have 5-year renewable marriage licenses. And not for the idea that it's easy to get out of, but really in the 4th year, you should be asking yourself, am I doing enough for my partner? Am I really doing enough? And am I keeping this alive? And then it being renewed. So his idea was every 5 years, you both have to renew. And if one party says, no, I don't want to, then the marriage dissolves and you have an arrangement in place for the children, etc., etc.
Pragmatic.
Wow. Show of hands, how many people
Yeah,
like that
there's a
idea?
chapter in the book on that. How many of you think that could be a good idea? Actually, that's nice to see. Okay. If it was done with that in mind, I think, yeah. So one of the chapters in the book is, do you need a license to marry your partner?
I'd have to say it should be 10 years. 5 years doesn't sound like enough of a commitment.
Enough time. Actually,
As somebody who couldn't make it work once, even so, like.
Interestingly,
10 is hope.
men said 7, women said 3.
I'm worse than most men. I think the gentleman there had a question. I saw a hand go up somewhere there.
It was really like getting a compliment from God.
Oh.
And yes, really, because he truly was the God of advertising. And I think one of the nicest things he told me when I did, it was of course for another advertising agency, a person called Suresh Malik, who was with O&M. And he came up to me and he said, by the way, I was known as the Jingle Queen.
Yes, of course you were.
So Suresh Malik came up to me and he said, think hard and think deep. Tell me what you feel when you get a bad throat and don't give me a word. So he would go have a drink and come back. And then when I'd say, actually, I kind of feel it's a kind of a kitch in my... He said, that's wonderful. That's the one I want. And then he said, think hard and think deep, Usha. Don't give me a word. What do you feel when you want to clear your throat? So he went out and I thought deep and hard and I said, well, I would say, okay, that's the one. So that's how Vix ki goli lo, kich kich dur karo. Yeah. And it starts with gale mein kich kich dal, gale mein kya karu. And when Alec called me, he actually phoned me up. I was in Calcutta. He actually phoned me up. In those days, there were no mobiles or anything. And he says to me, that's one of the most brilliant lines that you ever came up with.
Yeah.
And we love your singing. And he always said that. And it truly is my sadness that I could never get a musical part in his the musicals that he did.
Yeah.
Because, he was very, very keen to use me, and I was sad that it didn't happen because dates didn't happen. And I'm probably also one of the only people in the audience who know both. And Lily Auntie for me was so, so special. And you know why? I mean, I wish that she would remember. I have tears in my eyes every time I think about her. Because she always says to me, Usha, you're one of the few people who don't love me because I'm Shashi's mother. Only. Yeah.
She was outspoken, that's for sure. She
so
is.
beautifully done, yeah.
I remember you singing in our living room, Usha.
Yes, and it was so marvelous that she would always tell me when you call me Usha, when you call me Lily Auntie, I feel so, so blessed. And as my singing grew, her love for me, or that mutual respect, just so beautiful. Give her my love.
I will.
Well, I hope I get to work with you on a musical part. The chance that Alec didn't get,
Ritesh, I just wanted to say one thing. I don't know if... So Alec was known as God in the industry, especially in the theatre industry. But what a lot of people don't know is that his secretary at Lintas was called Jennifer Pope. So you had to go through the Pope to get to God.
Oh, I love it. Love it.
To close out here, I'd just ask
Thank
one sort of final question for you both. These babies are out in the world now. You've been working on them for a while. And I would highly recommend both these books, and they're great companion pieces, and which is why we are all talking together. But what are you writing next? What is your next project?
Well, I have a book, Anand Deshpande, who is the head of Persistent Systems. I think they became a $1 billion company last year. He's just asked me to write a book with him. So he was really inspired by this one, and so he said that. I also have a science fiction series coming out next year. So those are my two.
Great. Congrats. Cannot wait. How about you?
Well, I have another children's book coming out, I think at the end of December. The publishers keep you. I have many books all the time coming out. I did something unusual. I've sent in an adult story again. Adult as not in all its colorful words, but I have a story for adults. The reason I keep qualifying that is because most of my books are books for children. So I thought I should tell you that, and my children's publishers would definitely like to take me out take me out into the world as people who write for children. So. I have a story coming out in a Hachette anthology about women's revenge.
Oh.
But it's interesting. It has nothing from this book in it, don't worry.
So interestingly, the science fiction series that I have coming out next year, one of the planets is a planet which is 80% female and has been since the year dot. So basically any baby that dies on Earth in the womb or within 11 minutes of being born, its energy or soul goes to another planet and is born there. But because we're killing so many female babies in India, China, South America, and Africa, that planet is and always has been 80% female. So what would the world look like if all of history, all of religion, all of science, all of arts and literature had always been 80% female?
Ooh.
Yeah. Okay. So that's coming out next year.
And I'm moving to that planet. This has been
what are you working on next, Ritesh?
Yes, Ritesh, what are you working on?
I'll ask you that. I know everyone would like to know.
Yes.
Do you know Ritesh is the director of those incredible films, including Lunchbox and Sense of an Ending? Yeah.
So what are you working on?
My mom put her up to this.
I haven't met your mom, where is she? But I am a mom of that sort.
I am working on many different things because just like the movie business is not as pure as literature. You have to have 7 things going to get one made. I am working, what I'm most excited about is I'm working on adapting Rohinton Mistri's novel A Fine Balance into a movie. And I'm adapting The Lunchbox to a stage musical here in New York.
Wow.
So it's going to be at the Lincoln Center next year, so you guys should come watch it. Shameless self-promotion here. And then my new project is with Usha Uttap in a musical part. Yeah.
That's great.
You too. You said it publicly too. This is a contract, verbal contract.
If you need an English accent.
If you're looking for voiceovers, I'm available.
Absolutely. And your brother too, and your brother as well. We'll pull him in, rope him in as well.
He's separate.
Yeah.
We're talking me. No, just kidding.
But this has been such a pleasure. Thank you for giving me this chance to read your books and talk to you. And now they're out in the world, and you guys are the first audience for this.
And we're both outside. We've got books available, and any donations you give us go to the Indo-American Arts Council.